Good morning. It is an honor for me to be with you today. Let me rush to thank President Proctor, Dean Ragsdale, and Matthew McBirth for the invitation. The subject matter that I'll be touching on today isn't an easy one. And so I don't take it for granted that they entrusted me with this opportunity to speak in chapel on an issue that a lot of people avoid. That you do have to be cautious of who you let speak on those particular issues. And so I thank you for that trust and just look forward to preaching the word and applying it to our socio-political arena today. So thank you for entrusting me with that. And I have to say, anytime that you're talking about an issue like politics, the question arises is how do you go about it? And some would say that the best way to go about it would be to be neutral. We know that our landscape is very polarized, and so if you're going to address people in a way that you're not going to lean to one side or the other, they say, okay, be neutral. But I think there's a better way. So today I won't necessarily be neutral, but I will do my best to be impartial. And there's a difference. To be impartial. I think we should come into these, especially when you're standing behind what in my tradition they call the sacred desk, which is the pulpit, that you shouldn't come up with any ideological or partisan motives. Not trying to push you to one way or the other, but to push you closer to what Christ would have for us all. And so as I address these things today, I do so with the objective of having Christians be more faithful in the public square. That is my one and only objective this morning. Well, if you don't mind, if you would stand with me for the reading of the scripture, which comes from Ephesians chapter 4, verses 14 through 15. Ephesians chapter 4, verses 14 through 15. And it reads, "Then we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves, and blown here and there by every wind of teaching, and the cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become, in every respect, the mature body of Him who is the head, that is Christ." Speaking the truth in love. I'd like to tag this text today, a public witness of love and truth. You may be seated. I wish I could come to you today and say that although we have a very polarized public square, that Christians have somehow been on the side of that Christians haven't really participated in the polarization and division that we see in our politics. I wish that I could tell you that we had really been salt and light every step of the way. But I can't necessarily tell you that. Christians, I think, in both parties must be more faithful in the public square, in politics. And in my opinion, the mistakes that we've been making aren't primarily a complex or inaccessible, they're not primarily from a complex or inaccessible theological origin. This isn't deep systematic theology applied to rocket science. We are missing first principles, the fundamentals. Christianity 101, love your neighbor as yourself, love God, those things that we are missing. And one thing I found to make sure that I don't miss in my ministry those fundamental things is that gospel hymns and old-fashioned spirituals can often serve as much needed reminders of the foundational principles that we never needed an advanced degree to interpret or understand. The truths that are sometimes barely visible from our culture wars and from our ivory towers can be glaringly obvious and instructive in the lowlands of our humility. These songs that I speak of were often tirelessly repetitive, but not vainly repetitive. They drove home the point. They may not have appealed to more sophisticated sensibilities, but they always made an appeal to the Holy Spirit. They always provided Christians with an ethic and the moral imagination that convinced civil rights leaders to go through Jim Crow's jurisdiction without sword or self-loathing. What I mean is lyrics like "Keep Your Eyes on the Prize," which is an adaptation of "Keep Your Hand on the Plow," which spoke of perseverance and how God's promises liberate us from being enslaved by the threats and trials of the moment. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. And I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on Jesus, spoke of the resolve to stay on task and overcome minor and major setbacks while centering Jesus in our every interaction. Another song continually repeats, "I'm going to treat everybody right until I die." How simple, yet profound, when you consider that they weren't just talking about people who blessed them. They were also talking about people who lynched them, people who bombed their churches. It was a penetrating exposition about how those who are committed to seeing the human dignity in everyone will somehow find the image of God in the most hostile manifestations of human brokenness. It speaks to how the only way to see God in someone who hates you is to see what's invisible outside of faith. You see, you have to want to see it. Sometimes you have to be willing to imagine it in spite of their behavior and all other indications. That's Christian. It's the difference between wanting vengeance and wanting redemption. Civil rights legend Fannie Lou Hamer did this. She showed an immense amount of compassion and conviction. You see, years after being beaten within inches of her life for the ghastly offense of registering black people to vote, she was asked about how she felt about the offending officer, the one who had her beaten. And even after being thrashed with a baton within inches of her life for no good reason, even after the officer got away unpunished and she was fined for the incident, Hamer gave an illogically loving response. When she was asked how she felt about him, she said, "I feel sorry for him because he's sick." She said that America was sick and that it needed a doctor and that Christians had to answer the call. She wasn't giving the officer or American injustice a pass. She fought for justice relentlessly and sought the persecution of the officer for his crimes. But she did not let his actions blind her to what Jesus said about even the most wicked among us. Love them. She knew that it's not love or justice, that it's love and justice. And this is the type of moral imagination that the church can offer to a fractured society. This is the brand of moral imagination that allows Christians to be peacemakers in belligerent times. It's the fruit of the Spirit that allows us to tenaciously look in the offender in the eye and demand justice without leaving room for contempt or vengeance. This is a true example of love and truth. Now, we already went over Ephesians chapter 4, verses 14 through 15. And today's subject is going to be about engaging culture and politics with biblical fidelity. And I won't hide the ball. The lesson today, based on biblical doctrine, is that we can't engage faithfully without love and truth, without justice and moral order. We can't choose political party over gospel imperatives. As we search for answers to the problems that afflict our society today, I'm afraid that Christians are being tossed back and forth by the waves of false cultural doctrine and blown here and there by the winds of flawed pop culture prescriptions. We get exposed to a trending topic or a fancy theory in academia, and we begin to put our faith in political parties or ideologies that talk good or that flatter us, but aren't actually edifying, that can show no proof of concept, and more importantly, simply are not biblical. But yet, based on the cultural identity of the messenger or the political party of origin, we follow that which is unbiblical and unsubstantiated. On the other hand, I would say with confidence that the gospel of Jesus Christ produces results. First and foremost, it's the key to salvation. But even if you haven't opened up your Bible to receive that revelation, if you do some outside historical research, you will find that it also can lay claim to tangible social renewal that can be observed by all. So when it comes to political engagement, when we speak in the public square, we shouldn't be speaking as generic Republicans or generic Democrats with grudges and false narratives on our lips. We should primarily be speaking as Christians, and we should be speaking the truth in love. Are Christians speaking the truth in love in the public square today? Well, the conversation about engaging politics to better society inevitably must address what teachings we follow and what methods we'll employ to achieve our objectives. Today, again, many Christians are following behind ideologies that are made by human hands and can't withstand biblical scrutiny. The Bible speaks to this. In Ephesians 4, Apostle Paul is talking, obviously, to the church of Ephesus. This was known as the persevering church. You see, Ephesus had endured a lot of suffering, and at this moment, it also had false prophets who were trying to infiltrate the church with false teaching. Earlier in Ephesians 4, Paul is talking about maturity, how we mature not as individuals, but we mature as a church together. And so in talking about maturity, he's talking about growth in mind, growth in understanding, growth in knowledge of the truth, and growth in moral character. So when he says, when we mature, he's saying, when we grow in mind, when we grow in knowledge of the truth and moral character, then we will no longer be infants. Meaning we won't be so malleable and impressionable, tossed back and forth by the waves, blown here and there by every wind of teaching. What is Paul saying here? Paul is saying that mature Christians are not easily deceived. He's saying that these false teachers wouldn't be able to indoctrinate mature Christians because mature Christians know what they stand for. Regardless of what false teaching is prominent, regardless of what pop culture is saying at the moment, and here's a big one, regardless of how much they're suffering, mature Christians should always be able to speak the truth in love. Christians should never let their circumstances dictate their public witness. They should never let the nastiness of their ideological or political opponents dictate their public witness. And this is one of the biggest lessons and one of the biggest principles of the civil rights movement. We know that the civil rights movement was about changing laws and changing systems, but I would tell you that there's something much bigger than that, a guiding principle that was much more important even than those things. And it was the idea that no matter how bad it got, no matter how ugly your opponent was, no matter what they were willing to do to you, you could never allow that to have a negative impact on your spirit. Because you could change laws, you could change systems, but if they had a negative impact on your spirit, you had lost too much. And I think we would all benefit from approaching it that way in our public witness today. We must always, again, be able to speak the truth in love. And this doesn't just apply to our personal relationships, but again, also to our cultural and political interactions. Now, I want to be clear. I do not think political or social ideologies are all bad. You can decide whether progressivism or conservatism is best in a given situation. But too many Christians have allowed their ideology to replace their religion. They're more bound to their ideology than their religion, and it's become very unhealthy and, more importantly, unfaithful. Their political affiliation has become religious in nature. We have to stop defending parties and ideologies like they're an accurate application or a great representation of the gospel. Because the truth is, they often separate love and truth as if love and truth are somehow at odds. As if love and truth were in conflict or mutually exclusive. You see, when we go into the public square, one side claims to be all about love, while the other side claims to be all about truth, and Christians are told to choose between the two. Well, I come to tell you today, Ozark, that is a false choice. A Christian can choose a political party. A Christian cannot choose between love and truth. Think about that. Because they're not in conflict. They're interdependent. The late Tim Keller once put it this way. He said that love without truth is sentimentality, meaning it's overly emotional, it's lacking in substance. And that truth without love is harshness. It's mean. It's uncompassionate. These ideologies tend to either be lacking in love or lacking in truth. And as a result, when it comes to political ideology, listen to me, to be conservative or progressive at all times on every single issue is intellectually lazy. It means you're not thinking for yourself or processing it for yourself. It's also easily manipulated. If I can just make you do the most progressive thing or the most conservative thing because that's what you're focused on, I can take you away from all your principles. But most importantly, as Christians, we must know that it's not faithful. Ideological conservatism and theological conservatism are not always the same thing. The left's concept of social justice is not always consistent with a biblical understanding. Here's what I'm saying. If we are conservative, when the issue calls for change and the dismantling of old prejudice structures, then we're helping to maintain injustice. If we're progressive when the moment calls for the regeneration or preservation of moral order, then we are complicit in society's rejection of the truth. Sin thrives in environments and in structures that are broken, but people want to preserve them and conserve them anyway. That's how conservatism can lead to sin or aid and abet sin. But we must also know that sin is at the same time progressive. Anyone who's dealt with drug abuse, anyone who's dealt with an addiction to pornography knows that it gets worse and worse and expands. And so what I want to tell you, you cannot place your whole public witness on conservatism or progressivism because they are not the gospel. It should pain us that certain communities can legitimately question whether or not they are loved by Christians, or legitimately question whether the Christian community will treat them fairly. Love does not guarantee agreement or affirmation, but it does call for us to be concerned about the well-being of others. You can understand systematic theology and you can memorize the entire Bible, but if you're unloving and uncompassionate, then you are not Christ-like. And this is where conservatism can run into trouble. We've been commanded to love our neighbors as ourselves, and if we don't do that, then we're not advocating like Christ would do. We have to care about the well-being of others and protect their human dignity. That's all a biblical definition of justice in the social context is about. According to the Great Commandment, if you would want or seek justice for yourself, then you must want it and seek it for others. If we truly love our neighbors, then we'll be socially concerned, and that won't just be a sentiment. It'll be active. It'll involve self-sacrifice. And we learn this definition of love from 1 John 3:16, that love is self-sacrifice. And so we supposedly have Christians who are against this idea of social justice, and I would agree that there are some very distorted ideas of social justice. But I don't believe them. I think that everybody cares about social justice. Some of us just want it for others and not for people that we're not close to. And here's how I know. I don't believe anybody in this room today would let somebody that they love and care about be unjustly imprisoned if there's something that they could do about it. You would not just sit there and watch that happen if you could prevent it. And no one in here today would allow the children in their neighborhood to drink lead-poisoned water if there was something that they could do about it. And why is that? Because you believe in social justice. Because you believe that we're all made in the image of God, and therefore we cannot be treated below a certain standard as human beings. But what we have to understand is that charity is good, but that justice is harder than charity. And this is the reason that someone will give you charity long before they give you justice. Charity, again, is good, but it can be distant, and the giver is in control of how much that charity is going to impact them. But justice, on the other hand, is either given fully or it's not given at all. It's a God standard. Justice threatens to disrupt the very systems and societal arrangements that benefit us. At some point, justice demands a conflict with self-interest. And that's why we run from it. There is no social renewal without love and social concern. You'll just create a harsh, hypocritical society that excludes marginalized groups and other people. So that is the love part of the framework that I'm trying to give you. But let's talk a little bit about the truth side of this conversation. In Ephesians 4:15, the term speak the truth comes from the Greek word that refers to teaching or professing the truth, often as it relates to doctrine. Now let me be very clear, this is not subjective. Everyone does not have their own separate truth. To speak the truth means to profess right doctrine or to be honest about how you recount events. We worship a God of moral order. God's truth provides us with direction and structure. In an ever-changing world, God's truth is unchanging. Now, I come from an urban setting. In a very urban setting, it seems like everybody wants to be progressive. Everybody's trying to prove how progressive they can be. But this is where progressives run into trouble. Because to move forward or to fix things, which is usually how we think of progressivism, is good. But being progressive is not the answer in every situation. For instance, if you are on the edge of a cliff, to progress or even to lean forward is not such a good idea, right? Or if you're already going in the wrong direction, to progress is bad. We have to understand that sometimes God is asking us to stand firm on His word or preserve things and institutions that He has already established as good. Modern thought tells us that we can improve everything, but God's truth cannot be improved. You can kind of think of it like a Picasso. You cannot improve a Picasso. You can only deface a Picasso. If you go up to any masterpiece with a brush and some type of erasing agent, I don't care how good of an artist you think you are, if you add anything to it or you take anything away from it, you have made it worse. God does not need our counsel. He doesn't need us to improve or evolve His truth. Sometimes what seems good and pleasant to us, we only find out later is destructive. Sometimes God is calling us to be obedient, and He's calling us to self-denial. But it's hard to be obedient, and it's hard to deny self when we buy into a societal ethic that says individual expression is sovereign. If you believe autonomy is the greatest good, it's hard to follow this book. Can a Christian fully embrace this philosophy and be faithful? I think it might be flattering, but you won't find an endorsement of that type of self-indulgence here. You won't see an endorsement of some type of human-centered, self-dictated reality in this book. This book tells us to die to self and to be crucified with Christ. This book is consistently about self-sacrifice, not self-indulgence. Jesus provided us with a model of social renewal that was concerned about marginalized individuals, and we must pursue that same course. But as much as Jesus loved and as well as He loved, He didn't simply coddle people with sentimentality. He attended to them with love and truth. You don't have to take my word for it. Let's go to the Bible. In John 8, the case of the adulterous woman who was about to be stoned. Jesus told her, go. This was His love liberating her from these hypocrites who were intent on hurting her. This was Him releasing her from societal bondage. But He didn't stop there. He said, go and sin no more. Because the other half of the truth was that she would never be completely free until her heart changed and she turned from her sin. Let's go deeper into the Bible. We can go to John 5. The lame man was told to stand up and walk, and then later told what? To stop sinning. The woman wasn't only a victim of external bondage, but also her own internal bondage. The man's infirmity wasn't only an outward disability, there was another matter that had to be dealt with by inward transformation. There's a similar theme in Exodus. God delivered the Hebrews from Pharaoh's hands, but He didn't just say, go off and live happily ever after. He gives them the law right after that, and He demands their obedience. He chastises them. Yes, God is a liberator, but He's also a father that requires moral order from the liberated. He brings wrath upon the oppressor and calls His children to self-denial so that they don't become the oppressor. But too many Christians have embraced ideologies that are keen on identifying how others have sinned against us while blinding us to how our own sin is devouring us. If the adulterous woman were here today, one side of the church would say, stone her, for she has broken the law. The other one would say, slay queen, live your truth. And both would be leaving her in chains. Both would be leaving her imprisoned. That was not the pedagogic creed of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. He taught us that the unjust and disobedient will receive God's wrath, and that Christian love is unconditional, but not without discernment and critique. There is a way that seems right to man, but ends in death. Christians, it's time for us to tighten up our philosophies, methodologies, and ideologies and adhere to a gospel standard. In conclusion, I want to ask you this question, and we all know there's an election coming up. More important to me than who wins is, what will be the condition of your heart on November 5th? When the election results are announced, and in the weeks and months after that fallout. Will you be drunk off the thrill of victory, reveling in triumphalism and out of a tribal win? Alternatively, will you be wallowing in bitter agony and defeat, heartbroken without a word of hope or encouragement for your suffering neighbor? Or will you faithfully remain sober and resolved in the encouragement or discouragement of the outcome, judicious and unbowed? Our political engagement must be a profound civic work, a great work. It's not to be taken lightly or used for our own frivolous purposes. Here's an example of the gravity of our public witness. Listen. Imagine, if you will, Frederick Douglass preparing to debate on the subject of abolition. As his people continued to suffer through the dark night of American slavery. Pen in hand, memories of braided bullwhips and rusted chains running through his mind, knowing full well that his brothers were still being beaten like mules and his sisters were having their babies torn from their grasp, raped and disregarded without recourse. And yet, he had to construct a cogent, constitutional, and moral case without allowing his emotions to pull him into logical fallacies. He had to articulate the pain of generations of disinherited souls without flinching or sinning under the weight of his anger. This couldn't have been just a casual or haphazard undertaking. It certainly wasn't a task to be neglected or trifled with. No, it was an opportunity to knock down the gates of hell. A chance to expose the devil's dealings and emancipate God's children and change the world. As he shrewdly maneuvered through the halls of power, this could not have been just another day at the office, just a leisurely stroll through the civic landscape. No, it was the opportunity to slay giants, to bid the kingdom come, a chance to serve notice about God's will and to advocate that that will be done. Our public witness is a declaration of faith. It's a testament to the excellence of being bound to the ultimate purveyor of grace and truth. A Christian public witness confined to the limits of conservatism or progressivism is a witness squandered, a light hidden, a praise and worship chorus muted. God bless you.